Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today, episode 114, Training Your Metabolism, How Building Muscle Increases Your Metabolic Rate, and TDEE, your daily or total daily energy expenditure. I am Jeff Black. I am joined, as always, by my beautiful and most handsomest ever of a man, Brandon DeCruz. And we today wanted to kind of give like a little recap of how our last little bit's been. So, B, I will let you go first while I ponder my last 7 days and go from there.
Alrighty. All right. So yeah, we've had honestly, we've had a couple of requests from those in the audience, from clients and things of that sort. So I know that the last few weeks we have not given a recap. So on my end, everything has been going well. I've just been focusing on finishing this building phase strong, which I just did this past week. So I just entered my fat loss phase as of yesterday morning. So there's nothing to report on. I just literally just got into a deficit. But I am looking forward to getting myself prepared for the upcoming fat loss phase that I have, and then also the photo shoots that I will be commencing at the end of this summer. Um, you know, in terms of business has been going really well. It is the first week of June. You guys will hear this a couple weeks removed. So by the time you guys hear this, this will be probably like the second week of June because we are a little bit ahead in episodes. However, I actually just wrapped up 3 long-term client transformations. And so one of these clients I had worked with for a year and a half, and then the other two I'd worked with for 2+ years. And I'm really someone that prides myself on having long-term relationships with clients. And in terms of these 3 clients, they've been, immensely great to work with, and I've completely transformed them. And I wrapped up actually all 3 of their phases. So in terms of, I just wrapped up those 3 long-term client transformations. So I just did open up my roster at the beginning of the month. If you guys have any interest in working with me, transforming yourself for the summer, please reach out to me. If you guys are interested in one-on-one nutrition training and lifestyle coaching, and if you're truly ready to make a change, definitely reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's open things up. As I honestly rarely have openings on my roster, I rarely promote that in the context of the show. So, it's this time of year where a lot of people want to get in shape. They want to be able to transform their body, their physique, their health, and then also enter summer in a place, or even end summer in a place that they're in a much better physique and a much better state of health and state of mind than they would be previously. And so, other than that, man, everything's going well. Like I said, there's all positive things all around in terms of I'm entering a fat loss phase. It's been a long time since I've done any photo shoot preps, and that's, I'm very intrinsically driven, but it is nice to have a tangible goal, like a date and everything set up. And that is something that keeps me driving forward because I really do believe that as a coach. I stepped away from the stage many years ago to really focus on my clients. However, even so, I really do like having some external goals in terms of what I'm shooting for, really pushing my body and really being able to get in shape. Because as a coach, and Jeff, I know you relate to me on this because we've had many of conversations privately. Like, we are a walking testament to what we preach, to the principles, to the lifestyle, to the approach, the training, the nutrition, the supplemental, the movement consistency, all those things. And a lot of coaches in this industry, they don't emulate that. And so they preach a bunch, they post a bunch of content, and we really have gotten into a space where we have more content creators than we have coaches. Like, there's very few people in the trenches actually working one-on-one, really helping people. And it's more like, hey, let me show you things on social media and make reels and things of that sort. And no disrespect to that, but I'm really someone that prides myself on leading others from the front and really walking the walk. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that. And also, we have this podcast platform as an outlet. So I'm looking forward to being able to catch you guys up, give you guys recaps on how the fat loss phase is going, if I'm trying any new interventions, or even like the struggles that I face along the way. And other than that, man, how's your week been going?
Dude, things have been good, man. I did a vacation, I got a chance to really recharge, got a kind of chance to set eyes to the future and kind of think about what does 55 look like to me? Like, you know what I mean? What do these 12 years really kind of play out to be? Um, so that's been kind of like where I've been at lately. I put more on social media. I took that over after taking a break to help push our podcast. I do the other stuff. So things have just been good. I've just got a lot of good stuff, man. I think it's probably, well, I will say this, dude, before we get on our podcast, the one thing I'm stoked about is I get 14 to 15,000 steps a day now, pretty much pain free.
Hell
And
yeah, dude.
I look forward to, like, you saw me 18 months ago in Tampa, and you know what I looked like when you saw me coming off that plane. You remember how fucked up I was. And just be able to say I avoided 3 surgeries and dodged that bullet. I am just so happy for the time being. And I'm just very grateful. And if you're listening to this and you have the ability to walk without pain, just know millions of people don't have that. So don't take that for granted. and get out there and get active today. Beautiful weather. It's summer. Let's get this going. Training your metabolism, how building muscle increases your metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. So we want to kind of get into the topics of training your metabolism because there is some truth to that, and there's various ways to do it. I don't want to get into the keto one, even though we could do a podcast maybe one day with Ben, to kind of talk about that in a different way. But let's get into that, man. Let's get into what we want to talk about for this episode, the topic of training your metabolism.
Yeah, so on last week's episode of the show, which was episode 113, we started a new series, which was focused on how to build and maintain your metabolism. As metabolism is one of the topics I receive the most questions about, and a topic I've been diving into for years. And it's also the topic that anytime we talk about it, it ends up being one of our most viewed and downloaded shows. So it is something that there's a lot of interest on. There's a lot of follow-up questions that I receive regarding metabolism, metabolic adaptation, things of that sort. We're going to cover a little bit of a different spectrum. This is going to be more building and how to upregulate your metabolism in this series. However, we will eventually get back into metabolic adaptation and my updated thoughts and views on how the literature has changed over time, because we've been at this point, this podcast is 2.5 years old. So we've had many podcasts that we've done and many topics that we've dug into, but things change over time, and I'm always open and I'm always reading literature. I'm always trying things with myself and with clients. So I learn and evolve across the span of time and year after year. But our metabolism and total daily energy expenditure are involved in so many aspects of our health and fitness, and they also play a crucial role in our ability to improve our body composition, especially when the goal is losing body fat. In last week's episode, we specifically covered the nutritional strategies for increasing your metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. So on today's show, I'm going to cover the influential role that muscle mass and resistance training play in building and maintaining a robust and resilient metabolism. And over the years, I've had a lot of individuals come to me for coaching who have had multiple goals that they're looking to achieve during our time working together. And oftentimes, these goals include losing a substantial amount of body fat, building a lean muscular physique, and being able to maintain a better body composition on a calorie intake, which they can actually sustain over time. So they don't want to be living in this constant state of restriction. And that's often something I have to shift them away from. Now, the reason I wanted to dive into today's topic is because engaging in progressive resistance training and building muscle is one of the key components and principles to actually achieving those goals, because investing time into building muscle makes your future fat loss phases easier and more successful. Muscle is what provides the shape and look to your physique, so that when you do go into a cut and you do drop body fat, you're actually able to reveal the lean muscular physique that you're going for. And building muscle is one of the most effective ways to improve your metabolism and increase your total daily energy expenditure so that you can sustain your body composition on a higher calorie intake eventually. So, on today's show, we're going to dig into the role that muscle plays in our metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. We're going to go through some examples, client case studies essentially, of how building muscle increases metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. We're going to go over some of the ways and methods and strategies on how to increase your metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. And then I'm also going to dive really deep into literature on resistance training's effects on metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. So you ready to get into this one, Jeff?
Dude, let's go for it. So what is the role that muscle plays in our metabolic rate and our TDEE?
All right. So muscle is one of the best investments we can make into our physique, our metabolic health, and longevity long term, which is why we need to focus on building and maintaining it. Now, muscle plays a key role in determining your metabolic rate and how many calories you will burn per day, which influences how low or how high your maintenance calorie intake is. And this is because there's a linear relationship between someone's level of fat free mass, aka their muscle, and their energy expenditure levels. So the more muscle you build and the more muscle you maintain, the more calories you will burn per day. And in a study by Poncer and colleagues, they found that the amount of fat-free mass, including muscle, that we have is the strongest predictor of our total daily energy expenditure. So the more muscle we have, the more calories we can burn on a daily basis, regardless of our age or our sex, as muscle tissue burns approximately 3 times as many calories per day as fat tissue does. So by building more muscle, we burn more calories. So if you want to increase your metabolic rate and your total daily energy expenditure, you should focus on building more muscle during building phases, and then also focus on retaining your muscle during fat loss phases, as muscle burns 3 times as many calories at rest as fat does. So it's the most metabolically active tissue that we can build and also maintain, which is going to benefit us from a total daily energy expenditure perspective, a calorie intake perspective, and also from a body composition perspective. Muscle is also the largest endocrine organ we have and makes up 40% of our body weight. And your level of muscle mass will generally account for 22% of your resting energy expenditure and accounts for up to 69% of the difference we see in metabolic rate between individuals. So, say that we have two individuals and we have two people and they're the same body weight, yet they have different body composition in terms of the amount of lean mass and fat mass that they're carrying. Well, the person who has significantly more lean mass, aka they have more muscle, they're a more muscular individual for that same body weight, they're going to have a higher metabolic rate and will burn more calories at rest each day than the person with less muscle and more fat mass. And so this is really important to take into consideration. This is something I've seen countless times in practice with my own clients. We really want to optimize that lean mass to fat mass ratio, not only so that you have a better body composition, but then also so that you have better metabolic health, better blood glucose control. You also have higher energy expenditure levels, so you can sustain your body weight and your body composition on a higher calorie intake, which means consistently adhering to a diet much more sustainable and maintainable long term, which is really what we're trying to go for. We essentially want to get lean and stay lean long term so that we maintain great metabolic health, great body composition, and then we also have a life where we're able to get more bang for our buck in terms of our activities of daily living, in terms of like how we feel about ourselves, our confidence, how we feel, look, and function.
Okay, so then what are some examples of how building muscle increases the metabolic rate in TDEE? Is there any research, I guess, on this? Are you gonna zing us to death on that? I love it when you give me the research shit, man, because you just know it better than anybody. I brag about you all the time. I'll read stuff. I'm like, I don't know. I want to give it to you and bother you, but I
Dude,
don't.
I appreciate that. But when it comes to examples, I am going to get later on to the podcast. I do want to go over the research backed effects of resistance training in the context of increasing total daily energy expenditure and resting metabolic rate. But I actually, in this specific use case, I kind of want to go through some client examples, some case studies on what I've seen in practice, because that's really what the audience wants to know. Like, what are we really seeing when people build muscle? And so, the clients that I work with that are able to eat the most amount of food and still maintain a lean muscular physique are always those who have bought into the process of building muscle and whom I've taken through extended building phases where we've built a lot of muscle in that process. And this applies to both male and female clients that I work with. So, for example, I'm going to give you guys an example of both a male client that I've worked with and done this with, and then a female client, just so it's easy for you guys to really be able to relate to and then also see how the process goes on. This is, muscle building is not a short-term process. It is an investment of your time, your energy, and your effort, but it yields substantial returns on your investment. So, for example, one of my long-term clients, Ryan Campbell, I want to give a shout out to him. He literally just reposted our show twice today. He went through 2 episodes just this morning. So big shout out to you, my man. He is a great example of someone who I've helped build a substantial amount of muscle, and he's been able to maintain a lean physique and great health metrics, including high levels of insulin sensitivity while eating a ton of food. So when Ryan first contacted me for coaching, he was in the low 180s at the peak of the building phase, but his health markers were not in a good phase. So back then, this was over 2 years ago at this point, I initially took him through a primer phase to improve upon his health metrics and get his body into a healthier, more responsive state. Then after that primer phase, he had the goal of getting on stage. So we did our first contest prep together and he got peeled, but he was down to about 168 pounds when we actually got on stage. Now, after that show, we knew that we had nailed his condition. I mean, he got peeled, but we needed to build more muscle, especially in his chest. That was the feedback from the judges. And you could just tell that in the context of the rest of his physique, his chest was just lagging. So over the next year and a half, we have focused on building muscle and really we've paired both his nutrition and his training together to really optimize his rate of muscle growth, but also to prioritize his chest development. So I've taken him through many of chest specialization cycles. And so what we did was over the course of a year and a half, we did essentially like was fully focused on building. In that time period, we only had 2 short mini cuts in between that 18-month time period just to clean up his body composition. But ultimately, I got him from a stage weight of 168 pounds, which was, essentially the weight that he was the morning of his show. I got him all the way up to 205 at the end of his off season, but he was still maintaining really good condition and incredible blood work. Like, honestly, I have very rarely seen someone with such good blood lipids, CMP, and CBC profiles. Like, we really nailed things. We put a lot of prophylactic strategies in place. So from a person that came to me in the low 180s and had poor health metrics to someone that is over 200 pounds, so 20 plus pounds above, a year and a half, 2 years later, and has, incredible health metrics, we've made a ton of progress. But by the end of this past building phase, I had worked up his intake up to 735 grams of carbs per day and 4,400 calories on training days. And right now, he's at 10 weeks out from his first show of the year. and his carbs are still above 400 grams per day on training days. So this is someone that has been able to substantially increase his energy intake and his ability to stay lean because he's built so much tissue. Like if we look at it from a comparative perspective, where he was at from a building phase when he came to me, 180 pounds per se, and then he was able to get up to 205, so 25 pounds of tissue essentially. He is burning and churning through calories. Now, building muscle doesn't just help men eat more and maintain a lean body composition. It helps women do the same as well. We just happen, and I think this is why we don't hear as many examples. We just happen to see more examples of men being able to maintain a lean muscular physique because a lot of women just haven't truly committed themselves to going through a dedicated phase of building. And when we look at the muscle growth potential of women versus men, women are capable of building the same amount of relative muscle mass on their frame as men are. However, where women and men respond differently is in their amounts of absolute muscle gain. And this is because men start out with a much higher amount of lean mass at baseline prior to starting to train than women do. So if a male and female clients are training at the same time, may both increase their lean mass by 10%. But if a male started out with 100 pounds of lean mass, he would gain 10 pounds of muscle in that process. Whereas if a woman started out with 50 pounds of lean mass, she would only gain 5 pounds in that process. So on a relative scale, they both gain 10% of lean mass, but the male gained double the amount of body mass as the female did because he had a higher starting point at the beginning, which is why I said that women had the same relative muscle growth response to men, but we don't see the same absolute increases in muscle mass. A great example of a client case study where I've been able to help a female client build a ton of muscle and increase her calorie intake as a result is one of my clients, Elena, who is another listener to the show. So Elena, shout out to you. When Elena first came to me, she had lost weight working with another coach, but I really struggled to keep it off. And at the time we first started working together, she was eating 1,300 calories per day. And this isn't like I say 1,300 calories. Like this woman is a top level executive at a very large company. She's very analytical. She's very good with data sheets. I'll tell you that. So she was literally eating 1,300 calories and was just trying to keep herself from regaining weight. Yet the biggest issue that I saw initially off the bat was she had very high stress levels. And then also she just wasn't training in a manner that was conducive to building muscle. It was a lot of like circuit style training, essentially. So she really wasn't stimulating muscle growth. And so this was limiting her from actually building muscle, improving her physique. And so I really tried to switch that during our time working together. So during our first 4 months together, I put her through a primer phase where I got her back to maintenance calories and kept working up her intake as we continued to progress her training, but I had switched her from kind of circuit style training with very low rest periods to really hypertrophy specific training. So really muscle growth focused training. After that primer phase, we entered a lean building phase, which we're currently 6 months into. And in the last 10 months, I've taken her from initially eating 1,300 calories and about 130 grams of carbs per day to around 2,800 calories and 360 grams of carbs on training days. But that's because she's gained a ton of muscle over the last 10 months. We've dialed in her training, and she literally has set new PRs at the end of every single training cycle I've taken her through. Then we've also done other things such as work on her relationship with food. We've increased her protein intake. And then I've also really focused on improving aspects of her lifestyle, especially from like a stress management perspective. Now, the inspiring thing about Elena is that she's both postmenopausal and she's in her 50s. Yet her body composition right now is better than it's ever been. And that's because she's fully bought into the process and she works her ass off and it's been able to benefit both from a body composition and a metabolic standpoint as a result. So what I've seen in practice working with well over 1,000 clients at this point over the past decade are the clients who had the greatest metabolic resilience, meaning the ability to handle higher calorie intakes and maintain a good body composition at the same time, are those who are dedicated and have dedicated time to building muscle and have a ton of muscle, which allows them to burn more calories per day and thus have a higher maintenance calorie intake. So a lot of times people come to us, and Jeff, I know you can relate to this, where you have a client come to you, but they have low muscle mass. They're sedentary. They don't train in a productive, progressive manner. And they tell you, hey, listen, I not only want to lose fat and gain muscle, but I want to be able to eat more calories. I want to be able to eat more food and have some dietary freedom. And it's like, there's going to have to be a lot of inputs and changes that we make to be able to elicit that. But I'm sure you can relate to because you and I both came from a background of competing. We've prepped many competitors, and it's like, who gets to eat the most food? It's always the muscular individuals that really have prioritized getting away from being in a deficit. They're not constantly dieting. They put themselves through extended building phases. They work up their calorie intake, but they also train their ass off.
Yeah, so one client who I know listens to the show, Kelly, shout out Kelly. She always talks about with me in the weekly podcast how she likes what we do. She's one like that, except her journey is a little different, like boot camps all the time, so forth. And she was a little alarmed when I wanted to start raising her calories when I first got her. Like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, you gotta have. I always tell everybody it's like a ceiling. You gotta have room to start cutting. Like, you come with me at like 1,100 calories. Like, where am I supposed to go? Like, studies show I think below 800 calories, like the risk of cardiovascular event goes up. Like, it's just not good look. You know what I mean? So you have to like figure out a solution. And if you're doing it right, and usually I found a lot of success in just being like, hey, here's some macros, and just I usually will just set one group of numbers for like a week or two and try to get people to get a hang of it. And then I start evolving it more with them and be like, all right, well, let's add a little this, a little that. But you're right. When people come to you and they go from like boot camps to weight training, they will start changing to the way they want to look. I think that's the issue most people, and I have to reframe that with everybody. Like, when you get into this, there's years that kind of go into the looks that people want to see. And it's not as easy as some, like you get the guys, Brandon, I want to compete in 6 months and win the state show. And I'm like, look them up and down, like, well, how long have you worked out? Well, about a year. And I'm like, what? You know what I mean? So it's a lot of it's just resetting yourself and just really kind of like mapping out like the process of long-term health begins with the process of like building your muscle. Like if you want, I mean, dude, like seeing my mom a few weeks ago, that place is full of people that should be out still walking around. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think people kind of get that. And muscle's a huge thing. It's preventative. And you're right, like building it is a big thing.
Absolutely, man. I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we went through some of those samples. Are there any others you want to talk about? I think that the reverse dieting and all that, like you could put all those people through it, but I think maybe we talk about some strategies for increasing your metabolic rate in TDEE.
Absolutely. So on last week's podcast, we covered all nutritional strategies. So we went through sufficiently fueling yourself. We went through getting in a high protein intake diet and then also leveraging the thermic effect of feeding by incorporating more of a whole foods based predominant diet. And so on this week's podcast, we're just going to focus on resistance training and building muscles. So the two main strategies that we're going to discuss today are going to be just those. So it's going to be engaging in progressive resistance training and focusing on building muscle. This is not just engaging in training just to be able to say that you did a workout. This is training, which is different than working out. Working out is generally you could do it for fun, you could do it for energy expenditure, but training is really with a specific goal in mind. And this goal is going to be building muscle and then having all the downstream benefits and the cascade of positive effects that resistance training and building muscle can have. So when it comes to the goal of building a more resilient metabolism, increasing your metabolic rate and your total daily energy expenditure, and improving your body composition in the process by losing fat and building muscle, progressive resistance training is the king form of exercise for accomplishing these goals. And this is because resistance training is by far the most potent training stimulus we have to build muscle, which is metabolically active tissue. So by engaging in progressive resistance training, we get several benefits from a metabolic and a body composition standpoint. Resistance training helps to build muscle. It increases your basal metabolic rate, aka the amount of calories you burn each day at rest. It increases energy expenditure during training and then also throughout the rest of the day. It allows for better muscle maintenance and muscle retention when you're in a deficit, which can help preserve your metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure during dieting. And it also has a positive effect on your P ratio, aka the partitioning ratio, where for every pound you lose during a diet, more of it comes from fat mass than lean mass. So we're going to look at the different relationships that resistance training plays on different components of your total daily energy expenditure, just so you guys get a better understanding of this. So when it comes to resistance training and BMR, resistance training increases our metabolic rate both in the short term, meaning in the first 24 to 72 hours after a hard training session, and in the long term through the process of building muscle. So, seeing as muscle mass is the strongest correlate and predictor of how many calories we burn per day, and resistance training is the most effective way to build muscle, engaging in progressive resistance training and focusing on muscle growth can increase our basal metabolic rate, which accounts for approximately 60% of the total calories we burn per day. Now, resistance training doesn't just increase our BMR, meaning the calories that we burn at rest, but it also increases our total daily energy expenditure, which is the amount of calories we burn per day. And it does this through several mechanisms. Engaging in resistance training increases total daily energy expenditure through the process of adding muscle, as well as through the act of training in and of itself, as resistance training stimulates muscle protein synthesis to occur, which is the process by which we build new muscle tissue. And both the processes of stimulating muscle protein synthesis and building new contractile muscle tissue are energetically expensive processes. We also have to account for the fact that when we resistance train, we see an increase in our muscle protein turnover rates, meaning we see an increase in muscle protein synthesis, but we also see a increase in muscle protein breakdown. Now, when muscle protein turnover is elevated, we need to use energy, meaning we need to burn calories to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and also to initiate the muscle repair process where we're able to overcome the increases in muscle protein breakdown. Now, when we actually look at research on the daily calorie costs of protein turnover, it accounts for approximately 20% of our resting energy expenditure. So this is a really expensive process. So by engaging in resistance training and increasing protein turnover and going through that process of stimulating muscle protein synthesis and stimulating muscle protein breakdown and then recovering from that muscle damage repair and that muscle protein breakdown, you're raising your resting energy expenditure. Now, resistance training also increases our energy expenditure levels both during the session itself, as obviously we have to burn calories while training, but it also increases our calorie burn or the amount of calories we expend after training by increasing EPOC after exercise. So, EPOC, aka the afterburn effect, is the amount of oxygen and calories that are used after training to return the body to its normal resting state. So we don't just burn more calories during our resistance training sessions themselves, but we also burn more calories after them as well. So if you guys are to compare, essentially the days where you do no exercise as compared to the days that we train, you're going to see that your levels of energy expenditure, both during and after the training session themselves, are higher. So you're essentially just increasing that baseline that you have of energy expenditure on days that you're training and then you're active. Resistance training also provides the benefit of helping us to improve our body composition, as without resistance training, we are more likely to lose lean mass during a diet. And whenever we lose lean mass, that automatically lowers the amount of fat mass we lose for any given amount of body weight we lose during a diet. Then it also predisposes us towards seeing a larger reduction in our metabolic rate and our total daily energy expenditure, as well as being more likely to regain the weight we lost after and experience what's referred to as collateral fattening, aka the body fat overshooting effect, where when we lose lean mass, we are more likely to rapidly regain as much or more body fat after the diet than we lost during the diet itself. So this is a predisposition towards weight regain, where a lot of people, you'll notice this, that first and foremost, we have a very high diet recidivism rate where 80+% of individuals that go on a diet end up regaining all the weight that they lost and more. However, another thing that increases that predisposition or that likelihood of regaining fat mass very quickly after a diet is losing lean mass during the diet, where you experience hyperphagia, which is this intense, incessant hunger, which your body is essentially going into a protective mechanism trying to get you to eat enough to regain lean mass. But the issue after a fat loss phase is that your hormones are downregulated. You're really insulin sensitive, both at the level of, muscle tissue, but also at fat tissue. So you are more predisposed that when you eat in a surplus and you go into eating in excess because you're so hungry, that you end up regaining fat mass quicker than you do lean mass, because fat mass is so much easier to regain than lean mass, which not only takes, calories, but it also takes a stimulus of progressive resistance training enough time. It's something, building muscle is a time intensive and energy costly process. And that's what really leads people in a worse off place than they started with. And that's why we see those individuals that go on yo-yo dieting or yo-yo diets, or they aggressively diet, where they go on diet after diet after diet, and they really try to lose as much weight as quickly as possible, and they don't prioritize resistance training and protein intake and maintaining their muscle. They end up as a smaller, fatter version of themselves over time. And it's really interesting. There's a research paper that I always think about when I think about the body fat overshooting effect. And essentially, the title is something to the effect. Now, this is an old paper, so I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. It's by DeLue and colleagues. But essentially, what the title is why the lean get fatter over time, or something to that essentially that point. And really, what he's alluding to in that is that those that are chronically dieting are putting themselves in a precarious position where they're continuing to lose lean mass over time and then continuing to regain more and more fat mass over time. So eventually what they end up becoming is a smaller, fatter version of themselves, where they've lost lean mass but regained fat mass in the process. And this is really where we want to avoid. We want to be able to help people not only attain a lean muscular physique, but maintain.
Okay, so the next question I guess I would want to bring up to kind of round this up is, let's talk about the research looking at resistance training's effects on metabolic rate and TDEE. Because there is a few out there that goes over this.
Absolutely, my man. So before we wrap this podcast up, I will go through some of the research that looks at the effect resistance training has on both metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. So first, let's look at resistance training and metabolic rate. Now, when it comes to how resistance training impacts our resting metabolic rate, much of the literature finds that engaging in an intense session of resistance training can increase our resting metabolic rate and keep it elevated for between 24 to 72 hours. So essentially 1 to 3 days in duration. So for example, in a 1993 study, they found that a single resistance training session increased resting metabolic rate by 4.7 to 9.4%. So if we were to equate this to the average person, say a 180-pound person, this increase in resting metabolic rate would essentially equate to around a 85 to 169 calorie increase in resting metabolic rate for someone with a baseline metabolic rate of 1,800 calories. Then in 2008, researchers looked at the effects that full body resistance training had on resting metabolic rate in both trained and untrained individuals. And the reason that this is important is because a lot of research is done on untrained individuals, but we know that trained and untrained individuals have different responses from a muscle protein synthetic effect perspective, from a muscle gain perspective. So a lot of times we want to look at what's more of an ecologically valid or externally applicable research studies. So when I was looking at these, I really wanted to find trained research in trained individuals because I wanted to make sure that these effects were applicable to the clients that I work with and the listeners of the show. So they looked at both of these. And what they did was to be able to test this, they measured these participants' resting metabolic rate at baseline, so prior to doing any training, and then they put them through a full body training session. Then, after completing this session, they retested the resting metabolic rates at 24, 48, and 72 hours post workout and found that the resting metabolic rate increased by around 150 calories for up to 72 hours after this training session. So essentially, they saw that resting metabolic rate increase and stayed elevated for the 3 days after that hard progressive resistance training session. That was a full body session. Now, these two studies were both acute short-term studies, but we do have longer-term training interventions that look at the effects of resistance training on metabolic rate. And why this is important is because we don't want to just see what the effect of a single session has on resting metabolic rate. We want to see what is the effects over time, because really the biggest thing when it comes down to training other individuals or even training yourself is that we want to be in this for the long haul, and we want to see the benefits that we can get over time. So for example, in a 2015 study, researchers put healthy participants through a 9-month whole body periodized resistance training program. And I was really happy to be able to find this study because we generally, most of the resistance training literature is between 8 to 12 weeks at most. And the reason for that is it's based on the length of a semester within a college university, because most of these studies are done on university students. However, in this study, 9 months, this is a really long duration for a training study. Even some of the best training studies we have are only up to 6 months. So this was a really ecologically valid study to see what are the effects long term. Like, are we actually getting a benefit from doing continuous progressive resistance training over time? And what they found was that RMR significantly increased in all participants from the beginning of the study to the end of the study, with the average person that was training in this study seeing an increase in the resting metabolic rate of 5%. But they did note that there was wide variability between individuals, which could be partially accounted for by changes in fat-free mass, meaning how much muscle did they gain during this program, and then also changes in their thyroid hormones. Now, when it comes to the relationship between resistance training and exercise activity thermogenesis, aka the amount of calories that we burn during training itself, we know that resistance training is an energy demanding activity, which causes us to expend energy and burn calories during our training sessions themselves. Now, the amount of calories you burn during a training session can vary widely and are heavily influenced by two primary variables within your training programming, which are your training intensity, aka how hard are you training, and how hard are you pushing yourself, and then also your training volume, or how much total work you're doing. So when it comes to intensity of effort, your proximity of failure, or how close to failure you go, and how heavy you lift will primarily influence your calorie expenditures. So how many calories you burn are going to be very heavily influenced by that intensity of effort. So are you going close to failure, and are you lifting as heavy as you can for that desired rep range? Or are you sandbagging and lifting way too light for your actual abilities and strength output? And then the other area that it's influenced by is your training dose. And when it comes to training dose, this is your total training volume, meaning the amount of hard sets you do per muscle and per session, and the length of your training sessions. And between those two variables, intensity and then volume, that is what's going to influence your calorie expenditure. So basically, the harder you train and the more volume you do per week, the more energy you're going to expend as a result of resistance training. Now, a lot of the research that looks at how many calories we burn during training sessions themselves, and specifically through exercise activity thermogenesis, really use what I would consider unrealistic study designs, where individuals are doing very, very high volume training sessions and they're only doing it once, which many of you out there wouldn't have the time nor probably the desire to do. So, when we speak about this topic, I think it's really important to look at the research that's more applicable to the clients that I work with and that Jeff works with, and then those of you in the audience. Now, luckily, I did a presentation on this years ago about resistance training's effects on energy expenditure and things of that sort. And at this time, they didn't have this research, but since the time that has passed, we have more up to date research on this. So I dug into this more recently. However, a few years ago, a study was conducted to create a predictive formula to determine how many calories are burned during resistance training sessions. In order to determine this, they took healthy, active men and women ranging from the ages of 20 to 58 years old, which is really good because that's going to be the average, age of someone that we're working with. The average person I work with is between the ages of like 30 and 50, or even 35 to 55. And so this is a really like ecologically valid study, meaning that these are going to be similar to the individuals that we work with in the real world. And so what they did was they took these active men and women that were ranging from the ages of 20 to 58, and they put them through a full body workout that consisted of 7 different exercises, and they had them do between 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps per exercise. So this was a pretty standard moderate volume workout that's similar to what many who resistance train would do on a regular basis, as the total training volume for the full body was between 14 to 21 total sets. But this volume for that session was spread out between their quads, their hamstrings, their chest, their back, their buys, and tries. So the muscle group per session volume, meaning the amount of sets they did per muscle, was quite low. So this is very attainable and very realistic for any of you guys out there. Now, during the training session, researchers used a metabolic cart to measure the amount of calorie expenditure that occurred during the training sessions themselves. The goal was to see how many calories does hypertrophy training, meaning muscle building training, burn in addition to the amount of calories these participants would have been burning had they not been training during that time. Because what we have to consider is that when we go do a training session or a cardio session, a lot of times people are considering the total net calorie burn. But you have to realize that you would have been burning calories. So say you train for an hour. Well, you're going to burn calories that hour, whether you're training or not, because you have calories being burned through your resting metabolic rate and then also your NEAT levels. So if you go to the grocery store and you're walking around the grocery store, grocery shopping for an hour, you're going to be burning calories during that time. So we can't look at just the net or the total amount of calories. We need to look at what was the calorie increase during that hour that I resistance trained instead of sitting on my laptop doing work at home. And so what they found was that males burned 161 calories on average during that session, whereas females burned 88 calories on average during that session. Now, keep in mind, this was the total amount of calories they burned above what they would have burned during the same time period had they not been training with weights within this study session. And so based on these findings, the research team suggested that when it comes to the average energy expenditure levels that we see from resistance training, males burn an average of 3 calories per minute and females burn an average of 1.7 calories per minute during a resistance training session. Now, the reason we see this difference in energy expenditure between sexes is due to the fact that men are heavier and using heavier loads and lifting heavier weights, which increases the amount of calories they burn. So we just see this sex-specific difference, but on the total grand, we're seeing that it's not a huge discrepancy. Now, last but not least, we can't forget how resistance training impacts our 24-hour energy expenditure, as your body composition and your fat loss outcomes are not just determined by how many calories you burn in the gym, but how many calories you burn all day and what your state of energy balance is. So in one study, they took women and looked at their baseline 24-hour energy expenditure, aka their total daily energy expenditure for one day. They then put them through a full body resistance training workout and measured their total daily energy expenditure over the course of the next 24 hours following that resistance training session, and saw that when they trained, it increased their total daily energy expenditure by 327 calories, which included the calories that they burned during that session and then also the calories that they burned as a result of that training session the rest of the day. So they saw an increase of 327 calories in their total energy expenditure levels as a result of that resistance training. So essentially, the average of what they saw was they went from a baseline level of a TDE of just right around 2,000 calories. I believe it was 2,001 calories. And they increased by just doing that resistance training session that next day to a total daily energy expenditure of 2,328 calories just by incorporating a hard progressive resistance training into their routine. So overall, if you want to build a better body, you want to increase metabolic flexibility, you want to increase your metabolic rate and your total daily energy expenditure, you need to focus on engaging in resistance training and building muscle to train your metabolism to become more resilient in terms of the amount of calories you can maintain a better body composition on. As building muscle increases your basal metabolic rate, which are the calories you burn at rest, it's going to increase your total daily energy expenditure by increasing the energy cost of movement, by causing you to burn more calories during the session itself and then also after. And then building muscle also helps to increase exercise activity thermogenesis because as you build muscle, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. It's capable of lifting heavier loads, which allows you to burn more calories during a training session itself, and also to continue to train harder because you've adapted to a hard training and a challenging training stimulus. And so over time, you'll be able to train harder, be stronger, and overall, it's the best investment you can make into bettering your metabolic health, your body composition, and your quality of life. So if anyone out there, you have the question or the interest to see, I really want to be able to live a life of abundance. I want to be able to eat more calories or sustain. I don't want to feel like every time that I increase my calories that I'm going to all of a sudden regain fat or regain weight because I feel like I have a low metabolism or a low metabolic rate or a low total daily energy expenditure. Really think about it logically, listen to this podcast and invest, really double down and invest into the process of building muscle to really put yourself in the best position to succeed, both in the short term now, say during a building phase, but also when you go into a fat loss phase, because by investing into this process of building muscle, it's going to pay the biggest dividends on being able to reveal a leaner, more muscular physique that you're going to be truly happy with.
Dude, where can everybody find you at? You crushed this one.
Thank you, my man. As always, guys, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram, which is at @BrandonDeCruz_. If you guys have any questions, feedback on the show, whatever it may be, feel free to either DM me or to reach out to me, which on my preferable route, which is my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Jeff, where can they find you, my man?
I am on IG as Jeff Unbreakable Black. Same with TikTok and then YouTube. Against the Grain. If you guys are looking for me on there, as I like hosting stuff. With that being said, B, I gotta ask you a question before we leave. What do you think of my beard? Everybody says don't touch it until Christmas time because that's a full year. But what do you think of it?
Wow. I think it looks good, my man. What I will say is that it will be very interesting to see if you can get through this hot Tennessee summer with that beard.
Bro, I'm
not placing an over under on you. What I'm saying is let's see what you're saying in August.
I caught on to what's going on. In September, we have our guys trip, which means that I have to be lean. So the beard's just going to keep me hotter, which is going to allow me to sweat more, to stay in a higher thermogenic effect. So I'm not the fattest looking guy in the photos.
I'm getting peeled for that one, my man.
Oh,
so you better come ready.
Oh, yeah, you better believe it. I might be snorting coke if I can find good stuff from now and then. Just kidding, audience. Just kidding. But anyway, with that being said, I wanted to ask about that with the beard. I'm laughing so hard. People are like, "Don't cut it. Like, let it go all the way." I'm like, "All right, well, I've never done.
I think it looks good, but see if you could tolerate it, my man.
Yeah, I actually don't mind it a bit. It's almost the point that it flies up in my face when I'm driving my Jeep. It's kind of funny. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys could do me a favor, share, rate the show, everything like that we need to really get it out there. Lee puts a lot of time. I don't pull. I'm very transparent. I come on here. I do this to help B. I want to be able to have a good conversation, bring the best out in him. So you guys be sure to give him some love and all that. I know I'm chatty Cathy today, but give him some love, share it, like it, chat later. Bye.
Peace.